Hello, everyone. Again, and welcome to week number 2 of this 2-week module. I hope you found week number 1 informative by way of learning about formative assessments and how they could be used to help students learn and grow and not necessarily to grade. For this week, I wanted to focus on pre-assessments. Particularly, I think it's cut off here at the beginning of the year. Pre-assessments can be used at the beginning of a unit throughout the year, and it could also be used at the beginning of the year. I'm going to address the beginning of the unit a little bit at the end, but I'd like to speak a little bit to what I feel is the tremendous value to pre-assessing our students in the beginning of the year. So what is a pre-assessment in the beginning of the year? What would it entail? So here's the question. What are you going to pre-assess your students? You haven't even taught them yet. It's the beginning. What is it that you might want to know about your students that will help you teach them and tailor your instruction to them? Note again, just the word assessment. Assessment is not something. I'm trying to condition our minds and modify our perhaps previous conception of assessment as being something that comes at the end of a unit, at the end of 2 months, something that we use to grade. But here I'm going to introduce you to, as last week, it doesn't necessarily have to come at the end of a couple of weeks. In fact, in this case, it could come at the beginning, and it has nothing to do with grading. It's a tool to find out about our students and help them learn and grow. So what can you pre-assess in the beginning of a year that will help you help them learn and grow? So I'm going to outline a couple of things that we could find out about our students. First is prerequisite knowledge and skills. And by that we refer to what knowledge and skills do we expect our students to come into this course, this unit, this year, knowing and being able to do. We want to make sure that if I'm starting with a certain parsha, I'm starting with a certain assumption. If I'm starting with going straight into reading Rashi, I want to make sure that our students have the knowledge and have the skills needed to start off where I plan to start off. And sometimes we start off and our kids are lost, and we don't know that the reason why they're lost is just because they haven't ever mastered the skills or the content before this. It's not that they can't do what's currently at hand, what we're addressing now, but they don't have the building blocks. So these are kind of questions that we can ask at the beginning of the year to find out whether our students, where they're holding vis-a-vis this kind of knowledge. Another thing we could pre-assess is their upcoming knowledge and skill goals. And by upcoming, it refers to the content that we plan on teaching our students. If we're planning on teaching a certain parsha, if we're planning certain skills of reading and writing, could it be that there are some students who already know and who have already mastered that? So this would be a good place to find out perhaps what students already know and what some of them may have already mastered and where they may be ahead of other students. Another thing you might want to pre-assess, and I'll get into the whys of these a little later, is learning styles. Learning styles refers to, perhaps I'll give you a link to this, to students' preferences for how they like to take in information, and whether they're visual learners, whether they're auditory learners, whether they're more hands-on learners. What do they prefer? How do they process information best? It's not to say that they can't learn through all learning styles, but often people have preferences for how they like to learn, and if lecture speaks to them more, or group work, or really hands-on stuff. So it might be an opportunity to get to know this about the students and be mindful in it as you teach. And another thing you might pre-assess is interests, and interest refers to anything about them. Anything about them that they might want to share with the teacher and you might want to find out about them. If it's their passions, if it's their hobbies, if it's what they do on Sundays, if it's who they like to interact with, if it's where they live, whatever it is, it even extends beyond interest, but anything about them that you might be interested in knowing. And here's the key, not just interested in knowing as a teacher, but it's something by which the information you get, and this is important, everyone, will inform your teaching in some way. Assessment is not just for the purpose of, let me find out all there is to know about everyone. The purpose is, assessment is to inform you for change, for decision making. If finding out these answers and these responses inform you in any way and help your students in any way, those are the type of questions you want to ask. So let's ask the question of why pre-assess? Why pre-assess all these 4 areas that we just identified? Well, why would we assess prerequisite knowledge and skills? I think we addressed that before. We're going to start teaching. We need to know that what we assume our students knowing, they actually know. Otherwise, we're going to dig them deeper into the hole. They might not, we're going to start with something. If they don't have the building blocks to know that whatever you're starting, then they'll be stuck. And why not be able to help them now before it's too late? Upcoming knowledge and skill goals. If we have a student, if we're teaching a unit on the Holocaust, and there's a student who's very well versed, whose grandparents went through the Holocaust, who know a lot, know a lot about it. First of all, there's content that they might not need to know, and we can provide some enrichment or something else for him or her. B, it's good to know because that child might misbehave, might be bored, and we might look at it as misbehavior when it's really because he or she knows. And C, most importantly, if a child knows about the unit you're about to teach, for example, Holocaust, it would be a real shame not to invite and bring in his or her knowledge, his or her content into your teaching, into your learning, to empower him or her, to say, hey, David, you know about what happened in 1944 with it. Please share it with us. Can everybody join, a group with David, and he's going to tell you a little bit about that, to invite our students knowledge that they bring into our class. That speaks to what real good teaching is all about. And why pre-assess learning styles? Just because knowing our students and showing our students we know them and saying, hey, I know, Daniela, you really like things laid out for you visually. I made this map for you. Or getting into groups where some students work with more visual stuff, some students work with more auditory stuff, and some students work with more hands-on stuff. It helps us and it informs us. Or if we know who someone's really hands-on, but your style is very frontal, then I can understand more why a student might be struggling with certain content and it might be a little bit harder for him or her. And interests. The best kind of teachers are the teachers who show they care about their students, and that is without argument, in my experience, in seeing and observing hundreds of students, that is number one. If you bring your students' interests into your classroom, the student who, hey, I know Chaim, he loves hockey, or this one loves to bake, and how you can find opportunities to build those interests into your learning, into your lesson plans, into, at the very least, referencing something because I'm telling a story, or choosing a story because someone has a specific interest. There's something so special about doing that, and it's so easy. It's so easy to know what's their favorite color, what's their favorite flavor, ice cream, where they like to go and what they like to do, and it's easy. We're anyhow coming up with examples to bring into the classroom. We're anyhow making worksheets, we're anyhow having projects. Why not infuse it with your students' interests? And now let's answer the question, what decisions will you make based on pre-assessment results? What's the point? Why? You're going to give out this pre-assessment, you're going to get all the answers, and the key to a pre-assessment, again, I keep on saying this, I just want to, I want to reiterate it because that is really what assessment is all about. It's a decision-making tool. It allows you, it gives you information so that now I can help my students in whatever way possible. So what decisions can we make based on these pre-assessments? Well, there's a couple, and I'll identify them here. We can group students either because academically they're all holding in a certain way, or because interest-wise we have a bunch who like sports and a bunch who like reading, or learning styles. We have some who are more hands-on and some who are more auditory. Whatever it is, it gives us the ability to group them and group them in ways that we know might work. Enrichment, there's a term called curriculum compacting. It's similar to enrichment. It's just the notion that if there are students who get it, who know a lot of the unit or most of the unit, then what we can provide for them something else so that it'll be a rich learning experience for them. And a step back in instruction refers to the need perhaps to take a step back where we thought we were starting somewhere for the unit. We thought we were starting with going straight into the Rashi, but through the pre-assessment we see that a number of students don't even know the letters and can't even read the letters, for example. So if we see students are lacking in certain prerequisite knowledge and skills, it might force us to take a step back and to connect to students. And that's, as I mentioned before, knowing what their learning styles, knowing their interests, knowing where they're holding vis-a-vis certain content, it helps us connect the students and similarly make the content more meaningful to them. This is something I'm hoping you already figured out, but I always invariably often get this question. Students come to me and say, I'm going to ask them about upcoming knowledge and skills, but it's not fair to them. How could I grade them on stuff that we never learned yet? And my response is, it's not graded. Who said anything about grades? Pre-assessments are not graded. It's a decision-making tool. It's to find out about them. It's to give them feedback. It's not to grade. Another thing I suggest is perhaps revisit pre-assessments mid-year, just for your own sake, or just kind of put it on some Excel sheet, just to refresh your mind as to what your students' interests are, what their hobbies are, what their learning styles are. It's something as a teacher would be beneficial for you. And then there's just the idea of pre-assessing at the start of a unit. There are certain units, most units, I don't know if we'd say that there's a need to pre-assess in the beginning of the unit, because as most of us are teachers, perhaps our units are Perek Aleph, Perek Bet, Perek Gimel, Perek Daled. So what are we pre-assessing? But if someone's a history teacher, or like the example I gave, the Holocaust, or a Chag, for example, would be a great example of a unit where in the beginning of the unit we would pre-assess, because we're starting a Chag, we have a whole plan of what we're going to teach about Hanukkah. But maybe there are students that already know a lot, and if they do know, how can we empower them to contribute to the class? And if they don't know, and if they don't know more than we thought they don't know, what are we also going to do as a result? Reminds me of a story. I observe student teachers. It's part of my profession. I go to the schools to observe them, and I once had a student who told me she was a kindergarten teacher, and she told me that the next day she was a student teacher. She told me that she was going, in 2 days when I observed her, she was going to teach her students shapes. And I told her, you know what, do me a favor, tomorrow in class, go and why don't you pre-assess them? Get a sense for where they're holding vis-a-vis their knowledge of shapes. And maybe you'll be able to tailor your instruction a little bit better around that knowledge. So she calls me the next night. I was scheduled to observe her the following day, give her a lesson on shapes. And she said, guess what? Out of 22 of my students, 21 of them knew all the shapes. So here she was about to plan a lesson for the next day on shapes when most of her students already knew about it. So the question now simply had to become, now I have one student who doesn't know it, what do I have to do for that one student? It's a totally different kind of lesson. It's a totally different kind of instruction because she pre-assessed. Okay, and that is it for our intro to pre-assessments. I'm going to provide you with a link to an article I wrote regarding assessments not having to be graded. I'm going to give you some sample pre-assessments, and then I'm going to ask for you to design one on your own. Good luck as you embark on this week, and please feel free to email, reach out to me, and don't hesitate to ask me any questions. I wish you all hatzlacha, and I look forward to reading and seeing what you contribute. Bye-bye.